From partying with living legends to having romantic relationships with them, these women lived the lives only few could. But how did their lives turn out when the rock and roll buzz died down? Here are the most famous groupies and their hidden stories. Number 16. Connie Hamzy. Famously known as Sweet Sweet Connie, Connie Hamzy was one of the most legendary rock groupies in American music history. In fact, her life epitomized the wild and rebellious rock and roll lifestyle of the 1970s and beyond. Born in 1955 in Little Rock, Arkansas, Connie Hamzy grew up during the rise of rock and roll. Naturally, she gravitated toward the music scene in her teens and became obsessed with its culture and the rock stars who defined it. Following her passions, she became Sweet Sweet Connie. By the early 1970s, Connie had earned a reputation as one of the most well-known groupies in the industry. She was even immortalized in the song "We're an American Band" by Grand Funk Railroad, which mentions her by name. The song goes, "Sweet, sweet Connie doing her act. She had the whole show, and that's a natural fact." Hamzy wasn't just a fan. She saw herself as part of the rock and roll ecosystem. She also considered her relationships with musicians a form of connection and celebration of the music she loved. Somehow, she made it to the most influential circles. One thing about Hamzy, she was candid about her groupie lifestyle, even speaking openly about her sexual encounters with rock stars. Lore has it that she had been with members of bands like Led Zeppelin, the Eagles, and Van Halen. Unlike others who shied away from their groupie past, she leaned into it, often boasting about her experiences with high-profile musicians. And that was how the public saw her. For many, Hamzy symbolized the unrestrained, hedonistic spirit of the rock and roll era. She didn't fit into societal expectations for women. Instead, she carved out a unique and controversial niche for herself. Connie's life as a groupie became a subject of fascination, and she frequently appeared in interviews and documentaries about the rock and roll lifestyle. Despite her fame, Hamzy did not achieve financial stability or mainstream success outside of her groupie identity. She spent her later years in Little Rock, living a relatively quiet life compared to her wild youth. Connie Hamzy passed away on August 21, 2021, at the age of 66. Reports indicated that she died from liver complications, a sobering end to a life associated with excess. Number 15. Miss Cinderella. Born Cynthia Wells, Miss Cinderella was a prominent figure in the 1960s and early 1970s rock and roll groupie scene. Her life no doubt reflected the free-spirited and often chaotic culture of the time. She gained fame as part of the GTOs, Girls Together Outrageously. If you hadn't already guessed, this was a group of groupies turned performers under the mentorship of Frank Zappa. But before all of that, Miss Cinderella was a little girl growing up in Southern California. There, she was drawn to the burgeoning counterculture and rock music scene. Like many others you will see on this list, her youth coincided with the rise of iconic rock bands like the Rolling Stones, The Doors, and Led Zeppelin. Then came the GTOs. Created by Frank Zappa, each member of the group adopted a stage persona. In Cynthia's case, she became Miss Cinderella. The GTOs blended music, performance art, and comedy. In truth, the GTOs were pivotal in shaping the image of the 1960s groupie. In 1969, they released the album Permanent Damage. Their lyrics and themes often reflected the tumultuous and hedonistic lifestyle of the era. Like her fellow GTOs, Miss Cinderella was deeply rooted in the rock and roll scene. Unlike the more passive stereotypes of groupies, the GTOs were known for their wit, creativity, and ability to navigate the male-dominated rock world with their own sense of agency. She was also romantically linked to various musicians. Most notably, she had relationships with Alice Cooper and members of the rock band The Turtles. However, this lifestyle had its dark side. The 1960s and 1970s rock scenes were rife with substance abuse, and Miss Cinderella was no exception. Drug use, coupled with the pressures of the chaotic lifestyle, eventually took a toll on her physical and mental health. As the counterculture movement declined in the 1970s, many groupies, including Miss Cinderella, struggled to find their place. The GTOs disbanded after their brief stint in the spotlight. Group members like Cinderella had to navigate life outside the public eye. Miss Cinderella passed away sometime in the 1990s under tragic circumstances. Though details about her later life and death are sparse, it is widely believed that her struggles with addiction and the long-term effects of her lifestyle contributed to her untimely demise. Miss Cinderella's life was a mix of dazzling highs and devastating lows, reflective of the tumultuous culture she was part of. Number 14. Cynthia Plaster Caster Albritton. Cynthia Albritton, better known as Plaster Caster, was one of the most infamous groupies of the rock and roll era. Back in the day, she garnered a reputation for her unusual and artistic way of commemorating her encounters with rock stars. So let's take a look at her life as a groupie and how it intertwined with her identity as an artist to create a unique and enduring legacy. Cynthia Albritton was born in Chicago in 1947. While speaking on her early years, she once described herself as a shy and awkward teenager who loved music and idolized rock stars. Then came the Plaster nickname, and it is a pretty interesting story there. While attending art school in the 1960s, she received an assignment to create art using plaster. This inspired her to cast plaster molds of male rock stars' genitalia. As you can imagine, this project came to define her life's work and reputation. Her first subject was Jimi Hendrix, who agreed to let her create a plaster cast of his penis. This happened in 1968, and it set the tone for her career as both a groupie and an artist. From that point, Cynthia became a notorious figure in rock and roll circles. Musicians often joked about or aspired to become one of her subjects. Her project blurred the lines between groupie behavior and avant-garde art. It made her a standout in both worlds. Over the decades, Cynthia created casts of various musicians, though not all were famous or willing to go public. She later expanded her work to include female busts, celebrating both male and female sexuality. However, a lot of people dismissed her work as a novelty rather than a serious art. Cynthia passed away in April 2022 at the age of 74. Cynthia Plaster Caster's life was as bold and unconventional as her art. She turned her fascination with rock stars into a form of creative expression that defied societal norms. By treating her cast as art rather than mere trophies, Cynthia elevated the role of the groupie to one of creativity and collaboration, leaving a lasting impression on both music and art. Number 13. Miss Mercy. Miss Mercy was another fascinating member of the iconic groupie-turned-performance art GTOs. She also lived a life that epitomized the hedonistic and rebellious spirit of the 1960s rock and roll counterculture. Born Mercy Fontenot in 1949 Burbank, California, her early life was shaped by a fascination with the booming counterculture, particularly the music scene in Los Angeles. She became part of the GTOs, a group of eccentric and flamboyant groupies. While each member had a unique persona, Miss Mercy stood out for her unconventional style. From the dark makeup to the eccentric clothing and a fascination with the macabre, she had a well-defined aesthetic. Mercy and the GTOs were not just fans of rock stars. They were deeply embedded in the scene, influencing the fashion, attitudes, and aesthetics of the era. Their only album, Permanent Damage, is a cult classic that still reflects the chaotic and colorful world they inhabited. Unlike some groupies who were celebrated for their glamorous appeal, Miss Mercy was known for her eccentricity. She cultivated a persona that defied traditional beauty standards and reveled in being different. Miss Mercy was romantically linked to several rock stars during her time in the scene. Most notably, she had a brief marriage to Shuggie Otis, a prodigy musician known for his work on inspirational information. Their relationship, however, was tumultuous and short-lived. After the GTOs disbanded, Miss Mercy struggled to find her footing. The end of the counterculture movement left many figures like her adrift. Sadly, she was left to battle addiction and poverty for years. In her later years, Miss Mercy achieved sobriety and reflected on her life and experiences. She co-wrote a memoir titled Permanent Damage: Memoirs of an Outrageous Girl. The memoir offered an unflinching look at her time in the rock scene and the struggles she faced afterwards. Mercy's memoir and interviews revealed a woman who was both a product and a critic of her time, offering valuable insights into the exploitation and misogyny that often accompanied the rock and roll lifestyle. Miss Mercy passed away on July 27, 2020 at the age of 71. Her death was unexpected and deeply mourned by fans of the GTOs and rock historians. Number 12. Edie Sedgwick. Edie Sedgwick was a captivating and tragic figure of the 1960s. As you will see, her life was a complete mix of glamour, rebellion, and personal tragedy that culminated in a shocking and untimely end. For one, she was best known as a muse to Andy Warhol and a symbol of the countercultural zeitgeist. Though she wasn't a traditional groupie in the sense of pursuing musicians, her relationship with artists and her deep involvement in the underground New York scene intersected with the world of rock and roll. Edie was born in 1943 into a wealthy but dysfunctional family in Santa Barbara, California. Her early years were marked by emotional neglect, family scandals, and struggles with mental health. Seeking independence and escape from her troubled past, Edie moved to New York City in the mid-1960s, where she quickly became a fixture in the avant-garde art world. In time, Edie became one of Andy Warhol's superstars at The Factory. This was his infamous studio and social hub for New York's counterculture. She starred in several of Warhol's underground films, including Poor Little Rich Girl in 1965 and Vinyl later that same year. With her striking looks, pixie haircut, and daring style, Edie became a fashion icon and it girl of the 1960s. Her blend of vulnerability and charisma made her the epitome of countercultural cool. Edie's life was also marked by an intense struggle with addiction. The fast-paced, drug-fueled lifestyle of The Factory and her personal demons, rooted in her traumatic upbringing, took its toll. By the late 1960s, Edie's relationship with Warhol and The Factory deteriorated. Feeling exploited and abandoned, she spiraled further into addiction and instability. Attempts to launch a professional acting career failed, leaving her financially and emotionally destitute. Her status as a cultural icon was fleeting, and she spent her later years struggling to reclaim her life. Edie Sedgwick died on November 16, 1971, at the age of 28, from a barbiturate overdose. Her death was ruled undetermined, though it is widely believed to have been accidental. She had been living with her husband, Michael Post, at the time, and had reportedly been making efforts to recover from her addictions. Number 11. Barbara Cope. Now, when you want to talk about the most legendary groupies of the 1960s and 1970s, Barbara Cope was your girl. Also known as the Butterfly Lady, she is often remembered for her vibrant personality and close connections with some of the biggest rock stars of the era. Her life, while celebrated for its carefree and adventurous spirit, also carried some darker undertones. Wondering what they were? Let's begin with an understanding of her life before making it to the groupie scene. Barbara Cope grew up in Texas, where her free-spirited nature and love for music set her apart from her peers. She was drawn to the counterculture movement and made sure to position herself as a prominent figure in the rock and roll scene. She earned her nickname, the Butterfly Lady, due to her colorful and eccentric fashion choices. When she wasn't wearing butterfly-themed clothing, she would be rocking the themed accessories. Sometimes it was a little bit of both. We believed it symbolized her carefree bohemian lifestyle. Which brings us to her life as a groupie. Barbara Cope traveled extensively, often following major rock bands like Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, and Jimi Hendrix. She was known for her charisma and ability to connect with musicians on a personal level. Her presence backstage was as much about her personality as her beauty. Barbara, like other groupies of her time, embodied the liberated ethos of the 1960s and 1970s. She wasn't just a passive figure, she was an active participant in the cultural revolution, blurring the lines between fan, muse, and insider. As the rock and roll landscape evolved in the 1980s, the role of groupies like Barbara began to wane. The shift in culture, combined with aging and the harsh realities of her lifestyle, left her struggling to adapt. As the music world moved on, Barbara faded into obscurity, grappling with financial difficulties and the loss of the glamorous life she once led. Barbara Cope passed away in March 2021 at the age of 67. She died reportedly from natural causes. Despite her significant role in rock and roll history, Barbara's death went largely unnoticed by the mainstream media. This is no doubt a reflection of how groupies, once central to the music scene, are often forgotten by history. Number 10. JoJo Lane. JoJo Lane was another prominent figure in the 1970s and 1980s rock and roll scene. For Lane, she was widely known for her relationships with legendary musicians, her bohemian spirit, and her tumultuous life. One thing to note though she is often categorized as a groupie, JoJo also carved out a reputation as a muse, model, and musician in her own right. JoJo was born in Massachusetts in 1953. Interestingly, her upbringing provided little indication of the wild and glamorous life she would lead. Her striking beauty and rebellious nature set her apart from an early age. In her late teens, JoJo moved to London. She was drawn by the vibrant music scene. Her charisma and beauty quickly made her a fixture in the rock and roll world. JoJo's bohemian style, free-spirited attitude, and striking looks made her a muse to many artists. She embodied the hedonistic and liberated ethos of the era, no doubt blurring the lines between lover, artist, and icon. JoJo is perhaps known for her marriage to Denny Laine, a founding member of the Moody Blues and a longtime collaborator with Paul McCartney in Wings. Their relationship was both passionate and tumultuous, but it lasted throughout much of the 1970s. Her marriage to Denny Laine was marked by turbulence, financial difficulties, and infidelity, eventually leading to divorce. JoJo also faced challenges in balancing motherhood with her chaotic lifestyle. Before and after her marriage, JoJo was romantically linked to numerous rock icons, including Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix, and Rod Stewart. These connections cemented her status as a groupie. By the 1980s, as the rock scene evolved, JoJo's presence in the spotlight waned. She attempted to establish her own identity as a performer, but struggled to achieve the same level of success as her famous associates. JoJo Lane passed away in October 2006 at the age of 53. It was a tragic accident. She had reportedly fallen down a flight of stairs in her Cambridge, Massachusetts home. JoJo Lane lived a life filled with adventure, passion, and connection to some of the greatest artists of her time. Her shocking end was a tragic conclusion to a life that embodied both the highs and the lows of the rock and roll dream. Number 9. Cathy Smith. Cathy Smith was a complex figure whose life intersected with the music and entertainment industries in dramatic and controversial ways. She might have started out as a groupie, but she climbed up that ladder to become a backup singer. Her life was a mixture of glamour, scandal, and personal struggles, but at the end of it all, Smith became infamous for her involvement in the tragic overdose of comedian John Belushi. Born in April 1947 in Hamilton, Ontario, Cathy Smith grew up in Canada. She was drawn to the excitement of the music industry from a young age and sought out connections in the burgeoning rock and roll scene. Smith first gained prominence in the music world through her relationships with high-profile rock stars. She was romantically linked to Gordon Lightfoot. Interestingly, rumors have it that she wrote the hit song Sundown, reportedly inspired by their tumultuous relationship. You could say Smith's involvement with other musicians, including members of the band and the Rolling Stones, further solidified her presence as a groupie in the rock scene. Smith was known for her wild behavior, charisma, and willingness to immerse herself in the chaotic world of rock and roll excess. However, her reputation began to take on a darker tone as her substance abuse issues became more pronounced. By the early 1980s, Cathy Smith had moved into Hollywood circles, where she became acquainted with comedian and actor John Belushi. She was reportedly part of his entourage during the final days of his life when his drug use spiraled out of control. On March 5, 1982, Belushi was found dead in his bungalow at the Chateau Marmont in Los Angeles. It was later revealed that Smith had injected Belushi with a lethal combination of heroin and cocaine. At the time, this combination was commonly known as a speedball. Smith's involvement in Belushi's death led to her arrest and a high-profile trial. In 1986, she pleaded no contest to involuntary manslaughter and served 15 months in prison. The incident made her a controversial figure, vilified by the public and media. After her release, Smith attempted to rebuild her life away from the spotlight. However, her notoriety and struggles with substance abuse made it difficult for her to escape her past. Smith largely disappeared from public view in her later years, reportedly living a quiet and reclusive life in Canada. Cathy Smith died on August 16, 2020, at the age of 73. She passed away quietly in Maple Ridge, British Columbia, far removed from the chaos and notoriety of her earlier years. Number 8. Tura Santana. Tura Santana lived a life that defied convention and broke boundaries. While not a traditional groupie, her associations with notable figures in music and entertainment, including Elvis Presley, have sometimes placed her in that category. Best known for her iconic role as Varla in Russ Meyer's cult classic Faster Pussycat, her life was marked by resilience, charisma, and tragedy. Born Tura Luna Pascual Yamaguchi in July 1938 in Hokkaido, Japan, Tura was of Japanese, Filipino, Native American, and Scottish-Irish descent. She moved to the United States with her family, but sadly, she faced intense racism and hardships, including time in an internment camp during World War II. At the age of 9, Tura was the victim of a brutal gang assault. This horrific event had a profound impact on her, motivating her to train in martial arts as a form of self-defense and empowerment. In her teenage years, Tura became an exotic dancer, using her striking looks and bold personality to captivate audiences. She toured the nightclub circuit, becoming well known in cities like Los Angeles and Chicago. Her charisma led to acting opportunities, and she landed her most famous role as the vengeful, empowered Varla in Faster Pussycat Kill Kill. This performance solidified her status as a cult icon and a feminist trailblazer. So why has she been tagged a groupie over time? Tura had a romantic relationship with Elvis Presley, who was one of the most famous figures of the era. Lore has it that she even turned down a marriage proposal from Elvis Presley, simply stating that she wanted to maintain her independence. Her relationships with other prominent figures in music and entertainment further solidified her reputation as a groupie. After her peak in the 1960s, Tura faced significant setbacks, including severe injuries from a car accident. These injuries curtailed her dancing career. In time, she also struggled to find consistent acting work in Hollywood, as her strong, unconventional persona did not align with traditional roles for women at the time. Like many cult icons, Tura experienced financial difficulties later in life, relying on convention appearances and the support of devoted fans to sustain her. Tura Santana died suddenly of heart failure in February 2011 at the age of 72. Her death was unexpected and marked the end of a life lived on her own terms. Fans around the world mourned the loss of a true trailblazer who had embodied strength, independence, and resilience. She no doubt inspired generations of women with her unapologetic confidence, physical prowess, and refusal to conform to societal expectations. Number 7. Cynthia Doll. If anyone could blend creativity with an enigmatic presence in the indie music world, it would be Cynthia Doll. Although she is not traditionally considered a groupie in the rock and roll sense, she is one to always be brought up in the discourse. And it is understandable, really. Her collaborations with notable figures like Bill Callahan of Smog and her deep entrenchment in the alternative music scene have drawn parallels with the muse-like figures that inspired and connected with artists. Sadly, her story has an added element of shock and tragedy. Cynthia Doll was born in March 1971 in Roseville, California. As a child, she was always drawn to art and music. From an early age, she pursued creative avenues as both an expression of her individuality and a means to connect with like-minded individuals in the alternative music scene. Cynthia became closely associated with indie musician Bill Callahan, the force behind the project Smog. Their relationship, both personal and professional, introduced her to the underground music world, where she began to contribute her voice and ideas. Cynthia first gained attention as a featured vocalist and collaborator on Smog's albums, including Wild Love and The Doctor Came at Dawn. Her haunting voice and ethereal presence complemented Callahan's minimalist, melancholic style. In 1996, she released her debut album. Originally called Untitled, it was later retitled Cynthia Doll. The record showcased her atmospheric, experimental approach to music. In 2002, she released Sound Restores Young Men, which established her as a unique voice in the indie music scene. Unlike many figures associated with groupie culture, Cynthia maintained her artistic agency and identity, using her collaborations to enhance her work rather than being overshadowed by the figures she worked with. However, Cynthia's music and public persona often hinted at personal struggles. We mean there were reoccurring themes of vulnerability, longing, and emotional pain. Her ethereal style and haunting lyrics suggested a deep connection to the darker aspects of life. After the release of her second album in 2002, Cynthia largely disappeared from the public eye. This was the genesis of her enigmatic reputation. Cynthia Doll died on April 5, 2012 in her home in Sacramento, California. The cause of death was reportedly complications from an accidental fall. She was only 41. Her sudden and unexpected passing shocked fans and left many unanswered questions about her life in the years leading up to her death. Cynthia's death was met with a quiet mourning in the indie music community. At the time, it was clear the level of the deep respect she commanded among those who knew her work. Number 6. Sable Star. It goes without saying that Sable Star was one of the most famous groupies of the 1970s rock and roll scene. Known as the Queen of the Groupies, Sable became a central figure in Los Angeles Sunset Strip music culture during her teenage years. Born Sable Hay Shields in August 1957, her life was marked by fame, scandal, and a premature descent into obscurity. And just like most of her contemporaries, there was a tragic and quiet end that contrasts sharply with the vibrancy of her youth. First, let's go back to her teenage years. Sable grew up in a middle-class family in Los Angeles. As a young teenager, she was drawn to the burgeoning rock and roll culture of the Sunset Strip, a hotspot for bands and fans in the early 1970s. By age 14, Sable began frequenting iconic venues like the Whiskey A Go-Go and the Rainbow Bar and Grill. Her youth, beauty, and confidence quickly made her a standout in the groupie scene. It attracted attention from both musicians and the media. Sable became romantically involved with many famous musicians, including David Bowie, Iggy Pop, Mick Jagger, and Rod Stewart. Her relationship with Bowie, which allegedly began when she was just 15, is among the most controversial aspects of her story. Still, Sable was considered the it girl among groupies. She was admired for her style, bold personality, and ability to command the attention of rock royalty. Other groupies, including Lori Maddox, looked up to her, so it is safe to say that she cemented her status as a leader in this subculture. Sable later moved to New York City, where she became part of the punk scene and had a tumultuous relationship with Johnny Thunders of the New York Dolls. Their relationship was tumultuous, to say the least. There were so many allegations of abuse, and it coincided with Sable's descent into a darker, more chaotic phase of her life. While Sable enjoyed the excitement and glamour of her early years, her life as a groupie came with significant emotional and psychological costs. She often expressed regret about how young she was when she became involved with older rock stars. Many of Sable's relationships with musicians involved power imbalances, and she experienced physical and emotional abuse. She also struggled with substance abuse, a common issue in the rock and roll culture of the time. By the late 1970s, Sable left the groupie lifestyle behind. She felt disillusioned with the scene and wanted a more stable life. She moved to Nevada, where she started a family and worked various jobs. One of those jobs? A blackjack dealer in Las Vegas. Sable Star died of brain cancer in April 2009 at the age of 51. Number 5. Nancy Spungen. Nancy Spungen is best remembered as the controversial girlfriend of Sid Vicious, a bassist for the Sex Pistols. Besides her rocky love life, she was also a symbol of the chaotic, destructive side of the punk rock era. Often labeled a groupie, Nancy's life was far more complex. Born in February 1958 in Philadelphia, Nancy grew up in an upper-middle-class Jewish family. From an early age, she displayed signs of emotional and behavioral issues. This included violent outbursts and trouble with authority. She was eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia at age 15. Nancy's troubled youth led her to seek escape in the counterculture of the 1970s. She left home at 17 and moved to New York City, immersing herself in the punk rock and underground music scenes. Nancy became involved with musicians from the punk and rock scenes, including members of Aerosmith, the New York Dolls, and the Ramones. Unlike the glamorous image of some groupies, Nancy's presence was often polarizing. She was known for her abrasive personality and drug use. In 1977, Nancy moved to London, where she met Sid Vicious. Their relationship quickly became infamous for its volatility and mutual descent into heroin addiction. Nancy and Sid's relationship was marked by intense codependency fueled by their shared addiction. The pair became notorious for their public arguments, erratic behavior, and increasing isolation from the punk community. As their drug use escalated, Sid's career with the Sex Pistols faltered. The band disbanded in early 1978, leaving Sid and Nancy adrift and further entrenching their self-destructive habits. By October 1978, Nancy Spungen was found dead in the bathroom of their room at the Chelsea Hotel in New York City with a single stab wound to the abdomen. She was only 20 years old. Sid Vicious was arrested and charged with her murder, but claimed to have no memory of the events due to heavy drug use. Sid's death from a heroin overdose in February 1979 while out on bail left the case unresolved. Number 4. Anita Pallenberg. Anita Pallenberg was far more than a groupie. She was an actress, a muse, style icon, and an integral part of the Rolling Stones mythos. Often referred to as the Sixth Stone, Anita was romantically linked to two members of the band, Brian Jones and Keith Richards. As you can already tell, she left an indelible mark on the countercultural scene of the 1960s and 1970s. Her story begins in April 1942. She was born in Rome to a German-Italian family. Anita grew up speaking multiple languages and cultivated an early love for art, fashion, and bohemian culture. She studied in Rome and later moved to Germany and Paris, where she became immersed in the avant-garde art scene. Anita first met the Rolling Stones in 1965 in Munich, Germany. There, she began a romantic relationship with Brian Jones. Her intelligence, charisma, and striking beauty quickly made her a muse and confidant to the band. Anita's relationship with Brian Jones was passionate but highly volatile. Brian's worsening mental health and abusive behavior led Anita to leave him. The end of this relationship led to the beginning of another, this time to Keith Richards. Their relationship lasted over a decade and produced 3 children. Their partnership was infamous for its hedonistic lifestyle, including drug use, wild parties, and brushes with the law. Despite their chaos, Keith credited Anita as a grounding force in his life and creative inspiration. Anita wasn't merely a companion to the Stones, she was a creative equal. Her taste and style helped define the band's aesthetic, and her influence extended to the countercultural fashion of the time. To date, her bohemian glamour style remains iconic. Anita eventually chose a quieter life in her later years. She pursued art and gardening, finding solace in creativity away from the limelight. Despite stepping back from public life, Anita remained a figure of fascination, often interviewed about her time with the Stones and her influence on the era. Anita Pallenberg died on June 13, 2017, at the age of 75. Her death was attributed to complications from hepatitis C, which she had struggled with for years. If you made it this far, do hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates from us. Number 3. Cleo Odzer. Wouldn't you say the best stories are the ones marked by rebellion, intellectual curiosity, and a fascination for the wilder things? If you agree, then you definitely should know about Cleo Odzer. Born Sheila Lynn Odzer in April 1950, Cleo was born into a well-to-do Jewish family in Manhattan. She attended the prestigious Dalton School and was raised in an environment of privilege, which she rejected in favor of exploring alternative lifestyles. During her teenage years and early 20s, Cleo immersed herself in the rock and roll scene. Before long, she became popular as a groupie in New York City, mingling with famous musicians and enjoying the freedom and excitement of the counterculture era. Cleo was reportedly involved with several rock stars of the time, but unlike traditional groupies who were primarily defined by their relationships with musicians, Cleo sought to understand and immerse herself in the cultures she encountered. Cleo's life extended far beyond her relationships with musicians, though. She became an author, anthropologist, and chronicler of alternative lifestyles. Quite a unique legacy, right? You see, in the early 1970s, Cleo left the United States and traveled to Goa, India, where she became deeply involved in the hippie scene. Goa was a haven for Westerners seeking spiritual enlightenment and alternative lifestyles, and Cleo documented the hedonistic and communal aspects of this subculture. Cleo Odzer passed away unexpectedly on March 26, 2001, just days before her 51st birthday. The exact cause of her death remains unclear, though it is speculated to be from natural causes. Number 2. Tawny Kitaen. Tawny Kitaen is another fascinating figure often associated with 1980s rock and roll culture. Far from the lifestyle of traditional groupies, it was her relationships with rock stars and her starring roles in music videos that made her a defining symbol of the era's glamour and excess. Born Julie E. Kitaen in August 1961, Tawny grew up in a middle-class family in Southern California. Fascinated by celebrity culture, she decided early on that she wanted to be in the spotlight. In her late teens, Tawny pursued modeling and acting, landing small roles in television and film. Her beauty and charisma soon caught the attention of the music world. Tawny dated Robin Crosby, the guitarist for the rock band Rat, during the early 1980s. Her connection to Rat helped introduce her to the rock and roll lifestyle. She appeared on the cover of Rat's debut EP and their first studio album, Out of the Cellar. Tawny then skyrocketed to fame in 1987 when she starred in Whitesnake's music videos for hits like Here I Go Again and Is This Love? Her sultry dancing on the hood of a Jaguar in Here I Go Again became one of the most iconic images of 1980s music videos, solidifying her status as a rock and roll sex symbol. Tawny married Whitesnake's lead singer David Coverdale in 1989. The marriage was short-lived, ending in 1991, but it further tied her public image to the rock world. Tawny later married MLB pitcher Chuck Finley in 1997, with whom she had 2 daughters. Their relationship became tumultuous, and in 2002, Tawny was arrested for domestic violence against Finley, leading to their divorce. This incident marked a turning point in her public life, with her personal struggles increasingly overshadowing her career. Tawny's later years were plagued by legal troubles, including arrests for drug possession and driving under the influence. These incidents reflect the ongoing struggles with substance abuse. Tawny Kitaen passed away unexpectedly on May 7, 2021, at the age of 59. The cause of death was later revealed to be dilated cardiomyopathy, a form of heart disease. Other contributing factors included a history of drug use and health complications. Number 1. Nico. Born Krista Pefkin in October 1938, Nico was far more than a groupie. She was an enigmatic singer, model, actress, and muse. Best known for her work with the Velvet Underground and her solo music career, Nico lived a life filled with beauty, artistry, and self-destruction. Sounds intriguing, right? It definitely is. Nico's striking beauty led to a successful modeling career in the 1950s and 1960s. She appeared in major fashion magazines like Vogue and worked with prominent designers such as Coco Chanel. She then transitioned into acting with a notable role in Federico Fellini's La Dolce Vita. In 1965, Nico met Andy Warhol, who introduced her to the Velvet Underground. Warhol insisted she become part of the band, leading to her singing on several tracks of their debut album, The Velvet Underground and Nico, in 1967. The fact that Nico became romantically involved with prominent musicians and cultural figures like Bob Dylan, Jim Morrison, and Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones cemented her status as a groupie. After her departure from the Velvet Underground, Nico pursued a solo music career, releasing albums like Chelsea Girl in 1967 and The Marble Index in 1968. Her work was dark, experimental, and haunting, often incorporating harmonium and stark Gothic lyrics. Though not commercially successful, her solo work garnered a cult following. Sadly, Nico's life was marred by heroin addiction, which she struggled with for decades. Her dependency on drugs affected her career, relationships, and health. In time, Nico grew to resent her past as a fashion icon and deliberately distanced herself from her earlier image. Nico's life came to a sudden and tragic end on July 18, 1988, in Ibiza, Spain. She died from a cerebral hemorrhage after falling from her bicycle. Her fall was allegedly due to heat stroke. She was just 49 years old. Intrigued by any of these stories? Do share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button. You also can't miss the next video on screen.